This last week, I have been obsessed with yet another playthrough of Resident Evil 4. No, not that one. No, the other Resident Evil 4. No, not that one either. Yeah, there we go. Resident Evil 4. RE4 has everything that I really want from a video game. Suplexes, guns, they definitely will, but morally speaking, should they? Relationship, and the big one, inventory management.
I'm thinking I'm back!
Toss in a few jokes and some enemies that put me in a worrying state of mind, and boom, we've got a hell of a video game waiting to be talked about. Not like you need me telling you about how good Resident Evil 4 is, but yeah, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Most RE games spend at least a few minutes setting the stage and getting you prepared for what's to come with a neat little intro movie that may or may not be in live action, followed up with a short gameplay sequence that acclimates you into the game pretty quickly. This could either be in a more slow-paced fashion like RE1, where it takes a couple of rooms to find your first zombie, or it could throw you directly into the horde like in RE2. RE4 is mostly the same, with this long cutscene of Leon sitting there looking all cool, and then there's these two guys that are kind of assholes, but they offer Leon some death sticks, so I guess they aren't all that bad. Cut to Leon investigating a house to see if he can get a lead on where the president's daughter is. The president from Shadow the Hedgehog, obviously, by the way. Leon walks in, refuses to speak the same language as the homeowner, and quickly guns him down for a reason that could only be described as the guy acting in self-defense. But then more of his friends show up and they're really angry, so I guess it's okay to just keep going. There's no turning back now. You proceed further down the lane and get more warning signs of something may be going wrong here. Then you see one of the officers being burnt at the stake, and what ensues is a fight for survival in a village that's clearly got some issues. Everyone goes to bingo, and then boom, Resident Evil 4. It's probably the best opening in the entire series because of how much stuff is naturally told to you in the environment and through the enemy interactions. It also perfectly teaches you everything you need to know about the game's basic combat systems through steadily increasingly difficult situations. The main village segment has to be up there for one of the best combat encounters ever made too. You start out and none of the villagers know you're there until you make the first move. And when the heat gets turned up, you can run into any of the houses for cover and supplies. But pretty quickly, everywhere you go will be overrun. And then Chainsaw Man shows up and suddenly this is the most stressful thing I've ever had to do. This encounter is also the perfect place to figure out some of RE4's little tricks. The first and arguably most important being that Leon's melee attacks make him invulnerable for the entirety of the animation. And that's a huge incentive to kick and suplex as many enemies as you possibly can for the remainder of the game. The cadence of combat is already something that sets RE4 apart from basically everything else. Shoot, run, kick. Shoot, run, suplex. It's an excuse to break away from approaching enemies and brilliant for catching your breath. Plus, it can also take out a group of enemies since Leon's kicks are just that powerful. The first big battle of RE4 is so good because of a lot of little design decisions, but crucially, I think the strongest points are the size of the arena combined with how claustrophobic it is, while giving you a ton of little interactables to work with. Block a door to buy yourself some time, dive out a window to violate health and safety rules, and scrounge up all the supplies you can while the villagers close in. All of this stuff locks you into the moment-to-moment beats of combat, from taking enemies out one by one to quickly looting the supplies they drop to top up your favorite guns. When you get to the castle, you start dealing with more deadly weapons like scythes that can decapitate Leon, flails that have a surprising amount of range, and shields that turn into dust if attacked with a shotgun. Some rooms also have guys with crossbows up on balconies, so you suddenly need to handle enemies that are very dangerous up close, as well as foes that from afar can clip Leon with a bolt. A lot of the same combat rules apply to these guys though, where scoring melee attacks gives you some good breathing room, and their shields are more like a thinly veiled metaphor swiftly broken down by facts and logic. And by facts and logic, I mean a goddamn shotgun. What you're really dealing with at the castle, as opposed to a slew of new enemy types, is a higher volume of enemies in much tighter spaces sometimes, which is when additions like shields and heat-seeking scythes start posing a problem. I approach these areas by tackling enemies who pose the biggest problem first, and then work my way down to those that may not be so bad. But RE4 loves to throw curveballs at you to make you change up those plans really quickly. To help you bring these guys down quicker, you have locational damage reactions on enemies where if you shoot them in the arm or the leg, they'll react appropriately. Tactically shooting enemies in certain places at certain times makes certain things happen that are usually really funny. If a guy is running towards you, shoot him in the leg to make him collapse to the ground. Someone has a stick of dynamite, just shoot it out their hand and watch the thing blow up. If you're lucky, you'll get a head to explode in a headshot with your pistol, but it's basically guaranteed if you use the rifle to do that instead. Movement is almost identical to the older RE games in the sense that we've got tank controls. The only real difference is that Leon generally feels a little faster to move. His forward walk is pretty slow, but his backstep is quick enough to even avoid some attacks. Tank controls are inherently slow though, or rather, the things that you can do in full 360 movement are still very doable with tank controls, it just takes a little more work to do it. Stiffer turning means that picking a direction to go in is an all or nothing decision in tight situations. And you're punished when stopping and course correcting by being extremely vulnerable to ranged attacks or enemies that are lunging at Leon off camera. This all makes RE4 a pretty fast-paced game, especially for this point in Resident Evil's career. I mean, we aren't doing DMC3 combos or anything, but I imagine some kind of style meter would go pretty hard for RE4. Even so, there are times where Leon is surrounded and you'll have to think fast about what to do to get out of it. Tonally, RE4 is really funny too, because there is some dark stuff littered about in this game with some gnarly visuals and an oppressive atmosphere at times, which then feels sort of flipped on its head when the flip kicks get involved. Though this comes from the best period of media that combined thought-provoking material with bullet dodges, slow-mo shootouts, and lots of black leather, and frankly, I don't think I ever want to let this go. This is my era. Because your movement is limited to forward and back with subtle turns to the right and left like usual tank controls, positioning becomes one of the most important things to understand quickly. If Leon is caught in a corner and surrounded by enemies, getting out of that situation purely via movement is tricky. So keeping lanes open and being aware of where gaps in enemy movements are is one of the ways to get past Leon's sticky motion. Running away from enemies is always nerve-wracking because of this, especially when you need to stop and turn to get around a corner. There's been plenty of times where that's just ended things then and there. I also need to take a second here and thank the gods of Olympus for crafting the best mechanic that a survival horror game can have: the quick turn. If RE4 did not have a quick turn, I can easily say I'd like the movement way less. And I think combat in general would suffer a huge amount. Being able to quickly 180 makes reacting to certain situations in combat so much more fun, and it even makes exploration feel that little bit snappier. Aiming is suitably a little stiff to go along with the tank controls. When Leon pulls out a gun, the camera zooms in and presents us with our view, which is typically of the gun and its laser sight. There is no crosshair, instead you have to use the laser to dial in your shots. Moving the gun around essentially acts like a pivot, where instead of the whole camera moving to and centering on wherever you want to aim, the gun moves a little independent of the camera while subtle adjustments are made to keep everything in frame. Having the camera work like this as you aim and line up your shots is genius, as it makes those hectic moments in combat a little more legible. It's way easier to remain calm and composed when the camera isn't getting jerked around in every direction. From the movement to the aiming and shooting, everything you do in RE4 feels tight and snappy. This has to be the crispiest shooter I have ever played, if I'm being honest. I love how combat usually starts with some guy yelling and pointing at you. It's like the closest I'll ever come to doing something bad in public and getting chastised for it. It's great, I love this. But it also means that things are about to get hectic, and RE4 has a habit of turning up that dial very quickly if you aren't ready. And that's mostly why it manages to stop from getting stale. The pace is too fast, you just won't last if you get distracted. But after a while, the flow can get a little predictable. Shoot the guy in the face, kick him, find the next guy and do the same. Ooh, a new gun? I'll use that to shoot the guy in the face and kick him and find the next guy and do the same. And the game knows exactly what to do to spice this up. Remember those head explosions that were so cool to get? Yeah, well, now there's a chance that the Las Plagas parasite will shoot out from their neck and force the body to keep going. Something that was once a sick little action is now actually sick and disgusting. It adds a new threat that you can't even see until it happens at the wrong time, and it completely alters your relationship with the enemies. Anyone you put down now can suddenly just get back up again if they want, with some variants able to perform an insta-kill once they're close enough. Even with all of these elements there to make you do a little pee-pee poo-poo, RE4 never forgets how cool it is. Leon's controls, the enemy's design, and the way a fight evolves from strategic shot placing to scrambled melee attacks amidst a sea of flying axes and crossbow bolts, it works. RE4 never forgets to be exciting as well as extremely stressful, which helps make the game's long runtime feel way more manageable. RE4 is such a weirdly well-paced game, even when it's a bit longer than I'd personally like a survival horror game to be. My personal sweet spot is around 8 hours, and RE4 usually takes up about 10 to 11 hours for me. But even so, the pacing here is excellent. You are never in one location for too long, and the way that the game spices up certain locales to make them just different enough on a return visit is very smart. It also helps that QTEs exist to sort of jolt you awake if you're getting a little sleepy. Where things really change is with the Merchant, a little scallywag you'll bump into that offers up new weapons, upgrades, and a limited stock of supplies. He is essentially the personification of a save room, but as a cheeky little arms dealer. He makes the ebb and flow of RE4 so much more interesting than it already is, because whenever you visit him, you usually have enough cash to get some massive upgrades to your weapons, or hell, maybe even a new weapon itself. Splurge! Live a little, and experimenting with each pistol, weighing up the options of getting a new gun, or sticking with what you have, or using money you've earned to get more storage space. These all feel like important choices to make that are equally cool. And it really helps that each gun has its own characteristics that eventually blossom into unique perks that specialize the gun even further. Leon's starting pistol has the chance to be almost the best gun in the game thanks to its exclusive upgrade that ups criticals by 5 times. Then there's the Blacktail, which is a very good gun, but it doesn't have much that stands out besides it being pretty good. There's nuance to nearly every gun in the game though, even ones that might not be considered to be amazing, like the Punisher, which can penetrate through an enemy to hit another, but it sports pretty weak stats beside that fact. Weapons generally have very strict roles in combat as well. There's the knife that you can whip out at any time that's separate to the main weapon, so you can seamlessly switch to either in combat and use it to save ammo on a downed enemy, or use it to break open boxes without wasting the bullet. Might be a hot take, but yeah, this is the best knife in the series. There's no real doubt in my mind. Handguns are the neutral damage dealer. Shotguns are for crowd control at close range. The TMP is great at mid to long range damage, but churns through ammo very quickly, and the rifle is a long distance powerhouse that can be used up close with good timing and skill. Then there's the Mine Thrower, which is excellent at crowd control as long as you can get used to the delay with the explosion. I usually never bother with it, but for this video I took it around for a while, and yeah, it's surprisingly good. And then if you want to cheat, you can always just bring the rocket launcher. I was shocked to see how quick this just deleted Salazar. Yeah, that was downright scary. Just be careful where you point this thing, because Ashley can and will get caught in the blast if you aren't careful. Speaking of Ashley, yeah, she really isn't much of a problem. And in fact, I'd argue the game gets more fun when she tags along, which makes the years of chuds online complaining about her really funny to look back on. She usually sticks right next to Leon and reacts well if you need to aim past her. She usually just ducks, which admittedly gets her killed more than I'd like to admit, but it is what it is. That's not to say that she's a delight to work with all the time. Once she decided to stay put for no reason, and that led her to a very quick death and a long series of retries for me, so yeah, thanks Ashley.
Ashley, don't look at him, look at me. Ashley!
But RE4's combat ultimately works the best when you are stressed the hell out. And when Ashley's around and getting grabbed by enemies, the stress levels skyrocket, and weirdly I'm having more fun. I also think that having to worry about another character within RE4's framework works really well because of how tight the game's controls are and how well designed each combat encounter actually is. It never gets truly annoying to do, even when I die a bunch of times to a particularly stubborn room. But as good as RE4 usually is at balancing its encounters to feel fair, it's hard to feel that way about this stuff on Professional sometimes. For the most part, this is the difficulty I would recommend the most, since it makes enemies feel like a constant and persistent threat. It also makes collecting and saving certain resources feel more important, since a single green herb could be the difference between life and weird bug acid death. And for like 90% of the runtime, I love Professional. But then you get rooms with the Novista doors where you end up getting stun locked again and again and again and spat on a few times, and you have to restart the area like a dozen times, and oh, I'm getting annoyed again. Advice for anyone that hates this part, by the way. These things die in one shot if they're flying around in the air, so as you see one homing in on you, kill it with a shotgun and don't stop until the way is clear. It's the best way to just rinse them. Apart from that, and a few areas on the island, which we all know are a little rough, the difficulty really is balanced pretty well, which is always the sign of a good action game. When I'm more than happy to run a room for the 10th time after dying to a bunch of stupid mistakes, then I know I'm in good hands. When some difficult rooms do show up, part of the fun is unraveling that puzzle and figuring out how best to proceed. I especially love this room in the castle with 2 guys that launch the RPG at you every so often. They don't do it more than like 3 times, but every step you take in this room is followed by a nervous glance to see where else they may be hiding. It's really funny. And it's things like that which make RE4's playthrough consistently fun. No 2 rooms are the same, and the way you approach them could change dramatically depending on which weapons you have, how much ammo you've got, and how well you know the area. There's usually multiple paths in a room to take that'll lead you around, over, or through enemies to help you get a better vantage point depending on what the situation is. Plus, you can rely on melee invulnerability to get you through some extremely dicey moments. But there has to be some things that I don't particularly love, right? Well, I've never been a fan of survival horror games having an unbalanced resource economy. I want my supplies to be so tight that I'm scared to expend even a single shotgun round. But then again, RE4 isn't really a survival horror game in the normal sense. It leans way more towards an action game, and a strict ammo economy would probably end up slowing the game down in an unpleasant way. After all, RE4 is a very fast-paced game, especially for Resident Evil, and stopping to panic about ammo every 5 minutes wouldn't really be much fun. I should also touch on the adaptive difficulty, where if you do better, the game gets harder, and if you do worse, it gets easier. Which doesn't really seem to be a thing on Professional, but yeah, we'll still go over it. Being accurate and getting through fights unscathed tunes up the enemy aggression and damage, and vice versa. Adaptive difficulty is one of those things I actually don't mind, because it's interesting to have the game tune itself specifically to trying to beat your ass. So all in all, I like that it's a thing. And honestly, nothing's really as crazy as God Hand's adaptive difficulty. That game's insane. And I think it gives RE4's combat that extra twinge of difficulty that it really needs. But taking a step back and looking at RE4 from a wider point of view, it's beautiful to see how everything works in tandem with each other. I honestly think that this is one of the greatest shooters ever made, and that's not up for debate, nor is that a unique opinion. Every little mechanic feeds into the wider ecosystem so well and so succinctly that I'm amazed it even turned out as well as it did. That being said, I would like to poke my head into the universes with the prototype versions of what we got instead, just to see the butterfly effect in action. Would third-person shooters still feel like Winback, or those times in Hybrid Heaven where you have to awkwardly whip out your little laser pistol to shoot some cubes? This game is so cool, by the way. RE4 is still on a whole other level when it comes to combat design, level construction, and fitting all the pieces together to make a supremely satisfying action game. Because above everything else that this game does well, it succeeds at making you feel cool as hell, which is really what I want every action game to do.